Professor Kapai is an associate professor of English in Rajdhani College, Delhi University. He has written a book called Naga Folktales, Analysis and Cultural Reflections, and edited the book Encountering Modernity. He has also been featured in journals like International Baptist Mission Research, Sociological Bulletin, and Indian Historical Review. Today, we will discuss the conceptual foundation of the self, mind, and personhood in the traditional thoughts of Tangkhul Nagas. In this talk, Professor Kapai will also try to highlight the social implications and cultural models that shape these conceptualizations. The Tangkhul Naga tradition, expression associate thoughts and emotions with certain internal organs of the human body. Sir, I hand over the charge to you now.
Thank you very much for the introduction and also for inviting me to speak on an article I wrote as a chapter of my PhD thesis. You know, these are busy times for us with the admission going on, preparation of internet assessment mark, and also some personal engagement. However, I'm really glad to be here because this is the first time I'm invited to speak on my work. Who can refuse that, right? And the fact that you want me to talk on this particular essay, article, shows your interest in a philosophical topic of a tribal community, at least your curiosity. I wrote this some 4 years ago, and as a part of my PhD thesis. So uh, I haven't read it for a long time. Now that I reread it again, I found that there are some arguments which may be reformulated, some issues raised but not resolved, and some arguments may be better adequately fleshed out. If you have patience enough to read it, you might have noticed that. But it is a part of my larger argument, which is the emergence of modern consciousness among the Tangkhul Nagas. Tangkhul Nagas, for your information, live in the northeastern hills of Manipur, of a population of a little more than 2 lakhs. Some 15,000 live in what used to be called Somra Tract in Myanmar. I want to go about this speech in this order. Perhaps I may be allowed to speak for at least 25-30 minutes, and we can have question and Q&A session. You can write your questions on the chat box, and somebody could, take over asking that, rearranging, managing those questions. First, I want to give you an introduction, a kind of background, by pointing out 3 problems which I faced while writing this chapter in particular and the thesis in general. Perhaps some of you may be interested to hear that, and some of you who intended to take academic career will certainly find it useful if you are working on tribal society, that is. Second, I want to give a brief sketch of the idea of the self, and then move on to the discussion of the paper, particularly by introducing one term and by way of conclusion, the main elements of the article. Tribals are said to have worldview, not philosophy. Tribals are said to have mythical concept of the past, not history. And in fact, these observations are accurate if philosophy is understood as a systematic study of thought. If philosophy is understood as a system of thought on, say, existence, the branch of which is called metaphysics, system of thought on knowledge, the branch of which is called epistemology, and values, ethics, and so on. And the idea that tribals have only mythical concept of the past is also true if history is defined as the study of the past characterized by the principle of cause and effect and chronology. Yet, tribals have thought on the ideas of goodness, of good conduct, of understanding and learning. So how do we categorize that? They have genealogy, story or history of clan, village, place. If genealogy is not the history of a clan, how do we conceptualize it? What kind of terms do we assign? I will come back to this problem. Related to this problem is the scarcity of materials, and anyone working on tribal communities in the Northeast will particularly face this problem because there is no corpus of literature to start our inquiry. And from this corpus of literature, a theoretical framework could emerge and which could serve as a frame of reference for our inquiry, for our study, for our investigation, right? There is no corpus of literature. That, I think, is one of the primary problem. And again, there is no body of literature on, the body of primary sources from which we can construct, say, philosophy of or history of. On the contrary, the West, for instance, has a rich literature on the study of self. Think of Indian philosophy. They can easily serve as the frame of reference for our research. The question is, can we create a system of thought in terms of, the tribal culture? Will a research that is founded on the theoretical framework of the West or Indian philosophy, will such kind of research reach or construct a system which is true to tribal society, which is true to our experience? To create a system of thought that is true to the culture, experience, and thought of the tribal, we need to create a language with which we can adequately articulate our experiences. So this is another problem. How do we come up with a frame of reference, whether to use the West or Indian philosophy as the model? And how do we create a language? And related to this again is the practical problem, which is political in nature too. When we write a book, when we write an article, the first thing that comes to our mind is, where do we publish? Who will be the reader? Right? And some of you must have published books. when you looked on the particular guidelines given by various journals and publishing houses, they will specifically mention that you should not use foreign words a lot. That usage of foreign words should be uh, limited. Okay, and who will be interested in a philosophy or history of a particular tribe? A tribe which consists of about 2 lakhs, Tangkhul Nagas, or about 3,500,000, the Quereng Nagas, right? So we do not have readers. There are some people here and there interested, but then we do not have a concrete kind of readers. And there are no journals, dedicated to philosophy of a tribal community. So that is a practical problem. And if we want to express, the culture, the experiences, then we need to use the language of that culture, right? So you need to use the terms of that culture. If you read an article of Indian philosophy, you certainly know it. It will be full of terms which you haven't heard of. The West, we are more or less familiar with the terms, so it will be easier for us to identify. But philosophy of Chinese philosophy, Indian philosophy, you will encounter lots of terms you will not hear. But then they have readers. I mean, India, China, enough readers, enough journals, enough publishing house. But then for a small community, it's difficult. I think that's a problem of a practical one is what YouTubers also face, right? If you want to create a video, YouTube that is interesting, it should be something that you have attachment. If it is something that you know intimately, something about your culture, something like that, but then how many of you will share the culture, right? The American YouTubers, they do not face this problem because anything they talk is global. There is no local issue there. Anyway, this is the problem I face. This is where we can all come in, to create a language to express our experience, to assign terms to these concepts, to create a rigorous system of thought, which could become a force to be reckoned with, right? But then we cannot escape the dominance of the West in terms of the production of knowledge, epistemological dominance. And it is not necessarily bad, that we use such kind of theoretical framework to understand a certain society. It is not. I mean, we should build up on that, but then we should also try to create a system that evolves from the culture itself, from the experiences itself. Okay, so now moving on to the next, the concept of the self. This will be a rather Western concept of the self. If I ask you to describe yourself, in interview, we are often asked this, tell us something about yourself. What is our usual answer? Do we say, I am tall, I am fat, I'm rather thin? No, we don't. Because the essence of ourself, the self is supposed to transcend body. So it is natural for all of us to have that kind of notion of a conscious subject, right? Of uh, of the self conscious of its thought, desires. As you know, master of one's teeth. So the self could be understood as a mental presence or locus of consciousness, which is not the same as human being as a whole. Okay? If we define the self as the inner subject of experience, we are introduced to another term, subject, right? And subject has contradictory two notions. The first is the notion of a subject as the foundation of thought and action, as I've said. Now, this subject is a pre-existent kind of basis from which our action and thought emerge. You know, this is an a priori platform. But there is another notion of subject, which is the result of enculturating process, which is the result of socialization. The subject that emerge by learning social norms, social values, skills and rules of the games, rules of society, and so on. This is a subject produced by language, produced by culture. You know, we do not create language, we are born into language. We do not create custom, culture, tradition, culture. Rather, we are born into cultures. As we grow up, somehow we may change, we may be agent of changes, but then we are born into culture, we are born into language. So this is another notion of subject. Far from being the origin of thought and action, rather is a subject that is created by socialization, that is created by language, by culture. Beginning from Socrates' question dictum, know thyself. You know, the West has a long history of the idea of self, and Socrates changes the direction of philosophy by asking this particular question. The pre-Socratic philosophers asked, what is the world made of? Socrates asked, what is a good life? You know, how to become a better person. And for him, it is by cultivation of the self, by taking care of the self, by looking. And later on in 16th century and early 17th, Descartes changes another this direction of philosophy by again asking a simple question. You know, what is knowledge? How far can we know? In his famous term, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, that he can think of what he sees, his perceptive, cognitive abilities as an illusion. You know, the laptop before us, the desktop before us, the phone before us could be an illusion. Our body could be even a dream, you know. But then he is certain of only one thing, that is, he is the one who does the act of thinking. So now I think, therefore I am. Thinking makes me what I am. You know, separation of body and mind. Body as an extension, mind as a thinking subject, from which comes romantic idea, enlightenment, you know, with which adds another layers of in the debate of the self, reason and perfectibility, ability to progress, and so on. After that, with particular beginning with Marx's ideas of ideology, such terms like Gramsci's hegemony, Louis Althusser's problematic, Michel Foucault discourse, and so on. Let us not forget Sigmund Freud's unconscious. There is another notion of subject as created by culture, created by language, created by discourse, created by the practices, the habits in which we picks up through socialization. Okay, so This two contradictory, but this will be the base. Somehow I will draw from this arguments, general arguments. Socrates identify subject, the self, with the soul, and soul is the seat of knowledge and ignorance. For him, soul is the seat of good and the bad. Plato's tripartite soul, if you have read Phaedrus, which is included in the third year of our syllabus, English syllabus, Delhi University, he talks about three type parts of soul: rational soul, spiritual soul, appetitive soul. Let me not go into the detail of this, but Tangkhul also conceived a person as made up of four elements. Phasa Mangla Ning Shu. Phasa, body; Mangla, soul; Ning, mind; Shu, personal spirit. I want to particularly take up this mind, Ning, for about 10 minutes. Phasa, body; Mangla, soul; Ning, mind; Shu, personal spirit. Personal spirit, Shu, is like Socrates' diamond. Socrates in his dialogues said time and again about his diamond, that his diamond asked him to do this. Yeah, thank you, Shulu. Phasa, body; Mangla, soul; Ning, mind; Shu, personal spirit. Exactly. So Socrates' diamond is like his consciousness. The diamond asks him to do something, to say, speak up something, and so on. It's Shu in Tangkhul is like that, but it's not only positive. Okay, Shu can also lead that person into a negative act, into a bad act. So it has both bad and good influence on a person. When I was young, I grew up in a village, so this used to be a common notion. When bad people talk to themselves, bad people do that. When we ask elders, mother, parents, to whom they are talking to, they would say, "Oh, they are talking to their Shu, not to themselves. They are talking to their Shu." So Shu is a kind of companion, something that is external to person, that is not the same as the person, but then which has influence on the person's actions and decision choices. Let me not go into the detail of this again. And Mangla has been translated as soul, but so far as I know, the rituals performed and all indicate that consciousness resides in the soul, in Mangla. But that doesn't mean that it is the seat of knowledge. That doesn't mean that it is the seat of conscience, like Plato and Socrates' theory. What I am more interested to talk today is about Ning, mind. Relationship between body and mind has been expressed in different terms and phrases. Think of ukkakanang. Literally, this all will be a literal translation. Ukkakanang, it means tired abdomen. To be angry, Tangkhul say malungkor, it means swollen heart. To be anxious, Tangkhul says malungkering. Literally, it is a live heart, or a living heart. A live heart, I think, will be a more proper literal translation. And when one is angry, we say malung kwat. It means the heart is burst heart. When someone is courageous, we call malung kazang. And this is interesting, to have a heart. It literally means to have a heart. Malung kazang, to have a heart. But in English, to have a heart is to have pity, to be sympathetic of, right? It's different from English, the way we associate, heart with in a different way. So these metaphorical expressions pertaining to mind correspond with metaphors in English based on the heart. Just think of this: heartbroken. Okay, heartbroken. In Tangkhul, it is malungkakai. Let's say it will be literally translated. It will sound like malungkakai, but we do not say malungkakai. We say ning kakai. Ning kai kahai. It means broken mind. We do not say heartbroken, a broken heart. We say broken mind. Okay, if someone has a big mind, then he is big-hearted. If someone do something with all one's heart, in English it is called wholeheartedly, but in Tangkhul it is called ningkotong. It means with all one's mind. So metaphorical expressions based on the heart in English correspond to the mind in Tangkhul. Heart is the seat of emotion. The expressions are quite logical. In English it is quite logical. Heart, seat of emotion. So emotional words are identified with heart. But why do Tangkhul associate emotions with mind? That is the question I ask, and not with heart. My inference is that Tangkhul's understood the faculty of thinking in terms of two aspects. Okay, so this will be my original creation. Let me repeat this, that Tangkhul understood the faculty is what I want to call affinitive thinking. It is social in nature. Abstract thinking is associated with abdomen and precisely liver. And liver is associated with thinking in other culture to Indonesian, this Southeast Asian culture. So again, Tangkhul is not the only culture. Abstract thinking, as I say, is associated with abdomen, and affinitive thinking with mind. So to illustrate this, let me uh, introduce you two terms again, two phrases again, metaphorical phrase. There are two kinds of sadness, okay, kekenang and ningkejot. And there are many Tangkhul friends, so it will be much more easier for them to understand. First, kekenang and ningkejot. Kekenang means tired abdomen. Ningkejot means tired mind. What is the difference between this? Kekenang, tired abdomen. Ningkejot, tired mind. What is the difference between this? As I see it, the former connotes sadness due to event which is incomprehensible and mysterious. So when somebody dies, we say kekenang. We do not say ningkejot. Okay, we usually say kekenang, something mysterious, something incomprehensible. But if somebody dies and we say ningkejot, we are referring not to the event of death, okay, not to that abstract idea of death. If we say ningkejot, we mean more or less the living who would be suffering. If parents die, for example, we are thinking more about the children. That thinking about the children sadden us. So if somebody lost so much money in some gambling, we do not say kekenang. We rather say ningkejot. Okay, so abstract thinking, reason, that is related to reason. Abstract thinking is rather related to thinking in the belly, thinking social thinking, affinitive thinking is thinking in the mind. So the difference between thinking in the belly and thinking in the mind may be put in this way. The referential significance of the former is metaphysical. Thinking in the belly, abdomen, is metaphysical, and the latter is thinking in the mind is social. So reason resides in the abdomen, precisely in the liver. And as I've said, many Southeast Asian countries identify reason reside in the liver. Plato used to think that brain simply gives warmth to the body, that reason resides in the abdomen. So it's not a derogatory thing at all. But where is mind located? Now, this is the important, next stage of question that I ask. Where is mind located? Is it within the body or is it external to the body? But now think of the way in which mind is used. Okay, I have thrown some examples from Western philosophical experiment, thought experiment, and so on. If you are interested in to know more about it, please read the article. But I will be mentioning just again few terms which we can all understand. The terms related to the use of Ning, mind. Okay, there are people who has no mind, Ning Magazam. There are people who has mind, Ning Gazam, right? Like this is a very common expression. Ning Magakanao means mind is not latched onto a child. It's not in the child. Ningkui Kahayami is a person who has taken mind. So to take mind, to have mind. Why do we say that? If mind is already within us, like if mind is the result of inward reflection, is the result of introspection, as the Western philosophy has, described from Socrates, as I have said, if it is internal to us, if it is a result of introspection, subjective inward thinking, and so on, then why do Tangkhul say, to be specific, that to have mind, we have to take mind? Quy, ning quy, ning quy, ning gazam. Okay, so a person, a concept of person, to arrive at this, not the whole or concrete one, but at least to some idea of a concept of person, we need to ask this question, what kind of elements is a person composed of, which I have talked about. And second is, what condition does someone have to satisfy? In order to be a person, what condition? Because person is social in nature, okay? It is not philosophical, of course. Politically, we rather refer to as individual subject, right? So there are something that need to be acquired, attained to be a person. So is a madman a person? What about this Trinity in Christianity? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Do we say 3%? If it is 3%, then they will be different, So as I understand it, to become a person has to take mind, has to have mind. Okay, so a person without a mind, even if he is a grown-up person, okay, is a lesser human. So Personhood is therefore a kind of accomplishment that an individual achieves by virtue of the possession of certain faculty characteristic, and not something that is innate, not something that is born with. In order to become a person, as I see it for the Tangkhuls, a person has to attain something. And what is that something? That something is mind, is Ning. So translating Ning as mind is not very accurate, because mind for English has, more a, a rather different connotation than Tangkul Ning. So a person has to take that, to take mind, to acquire mind, to attain mind in order to be called a person. And a person who has taken mind is called Nying Sakai. It means he has become a man. He has become a person. Uh, to, in order to attain that mind, he has to learn. You know, George Herbert Mead call it taking the roles of others, internalizing what he calls generalized others. As we grow up, we learn that we are not only driven, our choices are not only driven by our own desire. We also do what society expects. That is what we call generalized other. And we are not influenced by everyone, but there are significant others, some important people who influence us. But it is only through this socialization, through this process of socialization, inculcation of mind, of social norms, values, skills, and so on, we acquire mind, and such kind of person in Tangkhul is called a person who has become a person, a man who has become a person. Okay, so this shortly is my main argument, and also I have laid out, by using languages, terms, and all, the principal arguments. Thank you very much for listening to me. Okay, so Shulu.
So, sir, we'll begin the Q&A session in around 5 minutes. Some of them will ask questions, and then we'll receive the questions for like five. Just wait for 5 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, no problem at all.
Thank you.
I am really glad that you have listed down all these terms, Malong Heart, Malong Kawat, angry, yeah.
Some of them I could not. Some of them I could not type down because I didn't hear it properly, or I was not very sure about the spelling, or
Okay, okay.
yeah, I didn't
Uh,
want to disturb the flow of the lecture, so I just did not ask
yeah,
you to repeat it. Yeah.
I also thought of preparing this, but then it was a short notice one. Uh, our this talk, and again, I was quite busy with other works, and I'm going to Kolkata tomorrow, so I've been busy with all these things. So I wasn't able to prepare a PPT. I thought of preparing it, but you have mentioned all the words that I have said. Ukakanang, Malung Karing, Malung Kavat. Malung means heart. Ningkakai,
Yeah.
broken mind. Yeah, Ningkakai, broken mind is in English, it is said broken heart, not broken mind.
Oh, okay. Okay, so sir, I was interested to know why. So, for example, you mentioned the difference between Ninkachot and right? So
Yeah.
so I was a bit confused, as in, so can you repeat? Like, I couldn't hear properly. Like, I was. Can you elaborate on the argument on why the two are different, even though they are sort of the same thing?
Okay. Yeah, yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh, I think there are some tangguls here. I also want their comments if how do they understand Ningajot and Ukakanang. But as I see it, okay, as I see it, Ningajot is referred to a set event, but which is located here on a sublunary, something that is concrete, some event that is concrete. Ukakanang, on the other hand, is used when the sadness, object of sadness, is something that is abstract, that is incomprehensible, as I have said, like death, idea, death. When somebody dies, we usually exclaim, Ning Ukakanang. That is our usual response. We do not say Ningajot. But as I have said, if we say Ningajot, then it refers not to the abstract idea of death itself, but rather to the concrete experience, thinking more about the children that a person has left behind. Okay, so this is my principal argument, one of my principal argument, that there are two kinds of thinking. First is abstract thinking. Second is what I call affinitive thinking. Abstract thinking is metaphysical in nature, okay? And affinitive thinking is social in nature. So Tangkhul's locate abstract thinking to abdomen, to liver, precisely, and social thinking to mind. And as I see it, Tangkhul do not conceive mind as within one's body. Mind is rather located external to body. It is the other, external to oneself. So self, if it is located in the mind, then it is not located within oneself. Rather, it is located external to oneself. Um, in this Western philosophy, there are lots of debate on this. Extended mind, the idea of externalism.
And
This is
also,
not a new thing.
okay, okay. Sir, I also had, uh, so since the Tangkhul language, since Tangkhul community is home to a variety of dialects, quote unquote dialects, or even languages that are mutually intelligible to each other, is this sort of is this sort of worldview consistent across all Tangkhul Naga dialects slash languages? Even in have you seen this sort of pattern even in other languages, or languages of villages, like I know many other Tangkhul villages, is consistent as well?
Okay, Shulu, thank you for asking that question. It's very political in one way, uh, because that is also a question of, is Tangkhul a homogeneous society? Can we understand, look at Tangkhul as a homogeneous society? The idea of the unity of identity, okay? That language, of course, is an important one. Cultural practices, again, important one. And it is very complicated to say, you know. But then specific to your answer, uh, the Northern Tangkhuls and Hunpun has now used as the uh, media, okay, the lingua. So Hunpun language, the Tangkhul language, has been standardized as the language of the Tangkhul. But Northern Tangkhul usually are very uh, related. There are lots of similarities. On except for few villages, okay, few villages like uh, Jinchroy, Sorapung, Chesami, these villages have more affinity, more with the neighboring tribes like Mao, Pume, Chakishang. Northern Southern Tangkhul again, the the history of Southern Tangkhul again says that many Northern Tangkhuls migrated to the area, but the Eastern one has language, that is quite incomprehensible to us. So Tangkhul, the what we call the Tangkhul language now, is the standardization of the northern one, the Hunpun language. So if you ask me if this speaks for the whole Tangkhul, it is not. It doesn't.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. And sir, there is another question. Someone asked this: how does Tangkhul Naga cosmology offer an alternative way of moving beyond dichotomous conceptions of Western philosophy, in which the mind and the body are seen as separate?
Okay. Uh, in the Western philosophy, not the whole of Western philosophy again, because in the contemporary, particularly the contemporary philosophy, now embodied idea of embodied mind has become so current. So it is not the whole Western philosophy, but beginning from um, Descartes in particular, there is a dichotomy of mind and body. And the reason why was so is also historically and politically situated too. It was a time when there were new scientific discoveries. And in the West, as we all know, the church, religion dominated, particularly this spread of education, particularly this educational institution. So it dominated education institution and in that way production of knowledge. Therefore, some critics, philosophers argue that Descartes come out with this dichotomy of mind and body precisely because he wants to differentiate, divides the domain of the church, which is the mind, the soul. And Descartes in other writings identify mind and soul. And the scientists, okay, the emerging science, whose domain will be that of body. Right? So there is a movement of how such kind of ideas come about, emerge. The movement from this, particularly identifying mind, soul with rational thinking and body with sin and all, but it is not the philosophy per se, but rather philosophy of religion or the religious tradition. In the Tangkhul cosmology, I do not, have other any examples relating to this. But then in Tangkhul, Mangla again is different. Somebody has also asked about Mangla and Shiv. Mangla is different from body. Okay, is seen as a kind of consciousness, a kind of presence. So if somebody is sick, a priest is called to call back Mangla. The argument is that Mangla could just leave the body. And if Mangla leave the body, a person falls into sick. Now, there are also concepts like Raikazan, and a person turning into tiger, something like that, or his soul, her soul, possessing a tiger. So a soul can leave a body and take another form. Let me take two uh, questions together. But Shi, on the other hand, is quite a different one. So Shi is rather understood as a companion, okay, that a person is born with, that a person is accompanied by his or her Shi. Is it is like, as I have said, Socratic daimon or a guardian spirit. In Western Christian tradition, there is a long history of tutelary spirit, guardian spirit. So it's like a companion. But as I have said, it is not only in positive way that she acts upon a person. It could be also negative. So if a person has a prophetic, mind, if he can predict future, we understand that he has a kind of intimate relationship with his shield. But if that person has, you know, too much of a relationship, that is, if that person identifies himself with shield, then he becomes bad again. So there is a kind of thin line, separating person and shield. If a person identified with the shield, he becomes mad. But then, if he has prophetic mind, then he has intimate relationship with Shield. Uh, in many ways, these priests were scared. People were afraid of this priest also because of this.
Okay, sir. And I wanted to ask. Another
Uh,
question.
okay.
Okay, so sir, uh, so since you talked about Raikkonen and Shi and all like that, uh, so when you talk about it, you also so the conversation steers more towards metaphysics and a lot of other, let's say, the realm of superstitions or uh, superstitions and magical elements. So uh, even so, it also can we infer that even so from the language itself we get an idea of how uh, from the language itself we can get a good idea of how Tangkhul's, or for that matter any tribal community thinks about uh, a lot of things about how it views the world. How can we infer that from? Can we infer from the language that can we infer the tribal worldview or the Tangkhul worldview from the language itself, like like in terms of metaphysics or etc. Can we do that? Uh,
Uh, yeah, this is the problem. The first problem I have said, it would be rather naive if we entirely draw our conclusion, our inferences, just from language. If we entirely construct a philosophical system just from language, it would be very naive. But then, if we can collaborate this with other evidences, proof, like folklore, like rituals, practices, right? Or if we can somehow draw a kind of parallel relationship from other culture, uh, African philosophy, for instance, or also from Western philosophy, that would somehow make it a logical, concept or logical system. Otherwise, entirely drawing from it would be, as I have said, so inadequate. And the reason why I emphasize on this a lot, drawing all this from language, is because uh, telling you other evidences, proof that I used in the article would take too long. I have drawn from, as I have said, the thought experiment of Palmer and Charmer and I couldn't remember the other writer, Ongo and Anga, the thought experiment they have kept, and also from other sources, but I concentrated only on the linguistic use, language, how ideas are embodied in language. That has been my special focus on this presentation. But then we need to do a lot of this. Is just a kind of touching upon a philosophical concept or sociological concept. It's just the beginning. As I have said, this is where we all need to come in, where we can create a more coherent system, a more concrete argument, logically, you know, and this logically strong system of argument, system of thought. And we all must, if you are interested, you as scholars should take up more of such kind of questions. What I have done and what some of us have done is just a beginning. But then, as I have said, there is no frame of reference from which we can work on. There is no theoretical framework from which we can build our study, our research. So the first thing for us is also to come up with such kind of theoretical framework, such kind of frame of reference, so that we can build on them, not only by just believing in it, okay, just by accepting it, but also by criticizing. Say Socrates, Plato's philosophy. The Western philosophy is footnote to Plato's philosophy. Whitehead said that the whole Western history of Western philosophy is footnote to Plato's philosophy, because Plato has laid the groundwork of all these philosophical debates, epistemology, metaphysics, ontology, and so on, ethics. Okay. But then all these philosophical arguments, this history, do not accept what Plato had said. In fact, Aristotle said, argued directly in against what Plato had proposed. So not to accept everything what we have said, what we have theorized, but also against that. But the point is, it should be a foundation. There should be a foundation. There should be some foundation, a framework from which we can all work on.
Sir, thank you so much. I found it really interesting, and so I think hopefully your work will also help us reflect on our own languages, on our own mother tongues, and sort of devise our own understandings of our own languages from a more academic, philosophical perspective. And okay, so thank you so much for agreeing to attend, for agreeing to give this lecture. And thank you so much to all the people who attended and asked such insightful questions, and like who were patient enough to stay until the end. Thank you so much. And thank you to my council members of Northeast Society St. Stephen's College for being so helpful. And like that's it. And thank you so much. And we'll have a lot more talks again. So sir and all the participants here, please do attend them.